Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
I need to make an announcement, and this is, I hope that I can find it quickly for you. I would like to share that before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo nor rectify the devastation wrought in Indigenous people, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, and consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance the ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. And I add, amen, it's about time. This is April 10th. It is 12:30 in the afternoon, and this panel is number 18402, I believe. Can somebody correct me on that? Yes? And we're going to get started. My name is Joseph Bennett. I am here from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. And I am a podcaster, author, and a certified happiness coach. And I love today's topic. I am really thrilled to be talking about it with Winston Cole and Florencio Mazzoldi and Tashiro. And a little bit about each of them. Tashiro tells me that as an undergraduate here at this university, he failed to not get kicked out of his dorm room. When I asked him why, he said there were multiple reasons and all of them were justified. So that's one of your panelists. Wisdom Cole comes to us from California. He is an outdoorsman. He loves hiking. Who doesn't, right? And he loves the mind-body connection that offers him. And Florencio wants to know if we could ask him, what failures do we need in order to thrive? And are all failures created equally? Please put your hands together for our esteemed panelists. And prior to starting today, I asked each of them when is their birthday, because I didn't know how to choose who gets to go first in introducing themselves. So we are going actually in order because the birthdays happen in August, September, and then November. So Flo.
Yeah, hi all. Name is Flo Mazzoldi. He loves to say Florencio. I don't know. Flo is easier. I come from Argentina originally. I did my undergrad there on software engineering. I came to the US to do a master's degree in computer science and business. Since then, I've been delivering technology for many industries. Currently work in biotech. I work in Ginkgo Bioworks, where we're trying to basically learn how biology works and deliver organisms that solve world problems. So that's the background. I guess you could have read that in my bio. What I think that the reason I'm here, I'm very much into growth mindset, which absolutely requires failure for you to grow and understand that you're not born with being awesome, and you can get better. And the other reason is I failed a lot. Like I got here just by failing a ton of stuff. Yeah, some seriously massive failures that I'd be happy to talk about later.
Yeah, thank you. Before we move on to wisdom, please know that there's a couple producers in the room, and if you have questions, which we hope that you do, just raise your hand. They will bring you a note card and a pencil, and when you're finished writing the question, which I know you're going to write it legibly, raise your hand again, and they'll come and collect it and bring it to me. Wisdom.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Wisdom.
It's great to be back in Boulder. Again, my name is Wisdom Cole. It's great to be here on this panel about failure. I proudly serve as the National Director for the NAACP Youth and College Division, where we serve over 30,000 members engaged in the fight for civil rights in this country. But you know, my journey in failure started a lot longer before my current position. You know, originally I am from Nigeria. My family immigrated here when I was about 2 years old. Grew up in California, where I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I actually studied and got my degree in chemistry. And as scientists, we learn that failure is a part of the process, right? But also as an organizer and activist, I've been a part of many campaigns that have failed, right? That have not done well, that have not produced the results that we seek to see in it. And part of what I've learned from that is how we continue to recognize that failure is not final. And so I'm excited to talk about thriving. I'm excited to talk about how failure contributes to your ability to thrive. And I'm glad to be here.
Ty, thank you, Wisdom.
Yeah, I'm Ty Tashiro. My background is in psychology, and I'm an author. I've written a couple books, I guess, related to failure. One's on social awkwardness, the science of why we're socially awkward and why that's awesome. And another one was on the science of choosing a great romantic partner, which involves dating, which I don't know if there's an activity with more failure than dating, especially modern dating, probably. But I looked a little bit into some of the research that's been happening on failure. I haven't actually looked at this topic since I was in graduate school. And there is this really interesting paradox that's brewing right now. I find kind of juicy a little bit. So there's this construct called persistence, right? And persistence is when you have a failure and yet you keep trying despite that, right? And the way psychologists have approached persistence for decades is just to treat it as this one thing and it's a good thing. Well, some clever folks a couple of years ago said, well, maybe that's not true. And what they found was there's actually two types. So there's holistic persistence, which is a work-life balance. You have an open mind about your work, but also your life in general. People with a holistic persistence kind of mindset, no surprise, are happier. They have stronger self-esteem. And because they're persistent, right, they tend to have pretty good outcomes. Now, there's another type called a rigid persistence kind of person. And the people with rigid persistence have lower self-esteem. They're very myopically focused on one aspect of their life, usually related to work. And they suffer from more depression, more anxiety, and they use substance abusing far more often. So not great, right? But here's the kicker. In numerous studies, what they found is that the rigid persistence people consistently achieve better outcomes than the holistic persistence people. Isn't that kind of juicy? So, while theoretically I would like to think I want to be a holistic persistence person, I can't let go of this thought that it would be a little bit better for the specific outcome to be a rigid persistence person. And so I think when we talk about failure, you know, that's kind of and you can all kind of think of yourselves and what type of person you might lean toward. You know, I think for me, I've been more rigid probably than I should be. So I'm interested to hear how this has played out in other people's lives.
This is a question for any of our panelists today. Could you briefly talk about a failure that you've had in your life or that you're currently having in your life that you've been able to transform into something more positive? What do you got?
I got one, but it's not brief.
Says the Latino in the room.
Well, this was about 2017, probably. No, 2007, actually. I was working in Ceridian. I managed a team that built a payroll engine. A payroll engine is a piece of technology that figures out your paycheck for companies. And when I got the job, the CTO sits me down and says, look, your job is the easiest job in the world, okay? All you need to do is make sure that you pay correctly and you pay on time, okay? That's basically like that, nothing else matters. And I looked at the technology that I was handling. It was all like extremely old technology, super rusty. Okay, I'm like, okay, I can innovate here. This is gonna be awesome. Okay, we're gonna put together the best payroll engine out there. It's gonna be fantastic. So the company grew by acquisition. So we selected one of the payroll engines as the top one, and we would evolve that one and make it better. Long story short, we did that, about 6 months worth of work. We deployed the payroll engine. We started putting new customers into the payroll engine. And about 2-3 days after the first payroll went out, the account manager started calling in and basically saying the payroll engine does not calculate 401k correctly. This is the only thing worse than that would be if the actual number in the check would be wrong. Okay, anything else would be better than that. It was a disaster. Massive amount of frustration by customers, account managers, led to my team and I to be spending a month on fixing the payroll engine to calculate correctly and fixing all the prior payrolls so that it worked and the companies could put the 401k correctly out there. So throughout the month, I got all sorts of pejorative, I think, language and not very happy people, and it was like incredibly stressful. But by the end of that, we had quality techniques that we talked about for years in payroll industry conferences. We ended up with some of the groundbreaking quality software quality processes that just didn't exist at all. So it brought a completely different kind of innovation, but it made us incredibly better in the long term.
Follow-up question for you. Can I ask about how did that affect you personally? Because Ty spoke about self-esteem. What kind of stories do you tell yourself when you realize that what you've been working on for a while just blew up in your face?
Yeah, I'm Argentinian, so kind of cocky. So I didn't immediately think, okay, I am a failure. But all that was in my mind was, I gotta fix this. Like this has to be fixed, independently of what people are saying out there. We need to fix this immediately. So I was much more focused on how to solve the problem than just beating myself up.
Got it.
Yeah.
Same question, Wisdom.
Yeah, honestly, I think I failed my way into my career. I think about my time in college. Like I said, I studied chemistry. And my whole point of going to college, I thought I was going to become a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatric surgeon. I studied really hard. I was in all of the chemistry, the bio classes. My sophomore year of college, I got the best research internship on campus, which was called the Mark internship. And there was only like 5 people in the entire department who got selected for this program. Wow. Even with the intense pressure that I was the only black person selected to be a part of this program. So it was not just the idea of me getting into the program for myself, but also this idea that you are representing a community of people who are oftentimes not in this space, right? And so I was excited to be in that space because I like to take challenges head on. But in this midst of this time, I was also getting politically active, right? This was in the wake of the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? And the idea that George Zimmerman was not convicted as guilty, in the midst of that happening, we didn't see a response from our university to this issue. And so for me, you know, as a student on campus, as a leader on campus, you know, I was an RA at that point in time. Folks were looking to me for answers, looking to me for solutions.
Explain to us what an RA is. Some of us don't know.
An RA is a residential assistant, so somebody who is leading students on campus, is in the dorms, working with the freshmen. And so part of, you know, my job in that moment, people were like, what do we do? You know, this travesty has happened in Florida, but it is affecting Black students across this nation. And so that's actually when I organized my first protest. And in the midst of doing that and getting into activism and getting into movement work, I was neglecting my studies, right? That semester, I got on academic probation. That semester, I got kicked out of my lab research. That semester, I had the most amount of fights with my mom because I was struggling with this fact of, I want to be a part of this movement. I want to be an activist. I want to be an organizer, but the things that I'm doing in the classroom don't matter as much to me anymore. And I remember this conversation with my mom. We were arguing back and forth. It's like, you didn't go to school to be an organizer. You went to school to be a scientist, right? And fighting to a point where like there was no more words, right? And so it got to a point where I couldn't trust what other people thought my future would be. I had to really take on this mindset of, don't believe me, just watch. You know, it felt terrifying. It felt lonely. It felt like everything that I thought I was going to be was no longer going to happen. And the people who were in my corner supporting me, who had uplifted me to this place, the second I turned and actually started focusing on my community, were no longer there, right? I was the poorest I ever was. I was living in my car for a period of time, right? You know, these things that you think are supposed to be there for you all the time, you know, it felt like the floor fell out from my feet. But again, I really had to adopt this mindset of, don't believe me, just watch. And so I leaned more into my activism. I leaned more into my organizing. And through the grace of God, through the talent and the skill that I knew I had within me, you know, I've landed at the place I am today, where I get to lead a movement of young people in the fight for civil rights, leading one of the most successful campaigns in student debt cancellation, where we see 30 million Americans receiving some form of debt cancellation in America today, right?
Ty.
Yeah, just watch. I like that. That's great. Well, you know, like my co-panelists, lots of failure certainly, and I'll tell you about one in particular. This was when my first book came out. It used to be the case you could just be a nerdy author and then fade into the woodwork and not have to do anything, right? No publicity or anything like that. That's not the case. That's not the case now. I didn't quite get that full memo. So when the first book came out, I was fortunate to get some publicity, and I'd done a video with Business Insider. I spent an hour and a half on camera talking to a great interviewer, and then I cut it down to 2 minutes, which, thank goodness, right? And so it actually looked pretty good. But there was all this suffering nobody else saw, right? The poor editor, I can only imagine what they went through in post. But this was about 8 years ago, and this is when people were realizing that YouTube was not just someone sitting in their basement with bad lighting and bad camera work, that if you did something with high production value, that this was the new way to go. And so there was this flood of funding into companies that were now going to produce high production value videos, like you see now, right? So I won't mention the company just to spare them the embarrassment, but one of these new companies, a producer contacted me and they said, we'd like to do a video with you. I said, okay, great. So I showed up in New York, Lower East Side, and if you've ever seen a production in New York, you know it's serious when there's multiple semi-trucks lined up on the streets. And I remember my friends who are actors saying, if Craft Services food truck shows up, you know it's for real. Craft Services food truck was there, and my heart rate is just beating, and and I see this huge crew, these huge cameras, and I think, you all have made a horrible mistake. And they did. And so they had hired, there were 24 actors that were going to be part of this. I was the centerpiece, I was the lead, in this. I have no acting experience, and I am horrendous. I don't have the capability to do this. And we were going to spend the next 10 hours, shooting what was going to be a very long segment. And from the whole time I was going through this, I knew I was totally messing it up. Like everything was just bad. And I got out of there, and I was really demoralized after that. And I didn't know what to do. So, but one of the things I've heard is, you go talk to somebody about it. You don't got to tell everybody about it. You don't got to post it on social media necessarily, but at least talk to one person about it. Thank goodness my cousin Kate, she's an actress on Broadway. She's kind of a weirdo. We're the two weirdos in a family out there in New York. I told her about the whole thing, and I told her just how bad it was. And one of the things I really appreciated is she didn't sugarcoat it. She's like, yeah, that's real bad, man. That's real bad. But she said, let's get to work. And, there are all kinds of things she suggested. I won't go into the full thing, but one of the things she said is, Ty, you're too wound up, just in general, like in life. She said, you sit too straight up, which I know I'm doing right now, one example. So she got me into yoga, which sounds counterintuitive. She got me into all kinds of things that were not centrally related. She worked on my skincare routine, actually, all these other things. But, over time, what happened is I did get better. And I think the lesson I kind of took away from that is sometimes the failure is so crushing and so in your face that you kind of have to go around it for a little bit until you can come back to it. And, now I'm not great, but now I can kind of hold my own a little bit. But it's been a long road.
Thank you. I have a question for Wisdom as a follow-up to what Ty was saying. So you spoke about going to medical school and being part of this incredible program, the only Black person, and then how your family reacted to that. And my question is, for those of us who don't have a Kate in our world, right? A cousin who can be there for us, who teaches us the ropes of what we're going through, where can we find a community of people? I'm thinking of those people who lift us up, Wisdom. Where can we find them? And if we don't currently have them in our life, how do we create them?
That's a really great question. So I struggle with mentorship, right? Because I feel like a lot of the times when I depended on people who are older than me to continue to support me, that they turned their backs on me. And so, particularly in that period of time, instead of looking at folks who came before me, I looked at my peers. I looked at people who were in similar positions as me and looked at what they were doing, right? And understanding how they were moving and how they were continuing to fight on, right? This mentality of, we don't know where the future is taking us, but to believe in yourself, right? You have to be, a little bit insane, right? You have to really be able to go to that place of you believe in this more than anybody else does, right? And folks are looking at you like you are crazy, like this is not real. Oftentimes activism is categorized as this thing that you do in college. It's a period of time. Once you graduate from college, you have to grow up and get a real job. And the amount of times people told me, like, you cannot sustain yourself on a career like this. When I first got an offer to even work at the NAACP, so many people told me, don't take it. Nonprofit is not consistently funded. You may lose your job tomorrow. You don't know what the future of this looks like. It's not stable, right? But I believed in something more than anybody else did. For me, I personally identify as a Pan-Africanist, right? The idea that for Black people to be free, Africa must be free, and for Africa to be free, Black people everywhere must be free. And that was something I really held tight on, right? This idea of like, what does it really look like to build a movement for freedom, movement for liberation? Something that I can see in this lifetime, and to see wins that are actually going to help create a better future, right? When Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and all these murders that have happened and consistently happen in America today, you know, that takes an impact. It takes a toll on your mental. And to see that becomes part of your reality. This idea that, you know, your skin, the thing that you live in each and every day is constantly criminalized. You know, I envision a future where that does no longer exist. And so part of what you have to do to kind of get out of that place is to believe in something bigger. You know, I believe in vision, right? The Bible says a people without vision will perish. You know, you have to believe in something bigger than yourself and turn to the people around you to continue to support you.
Thank you for, yes, please, Florencio.
Yeah, I'd like to make another comment on Kate and the value of her telling you straight up. I mean, I think that's something like, you know, like, as I said, massive failures of many kinds in my life, and many times you get the Kate that will tell you it's not that bad. It's okay. It's not. It wasn't really there. You weren't that bad. It was kind of okay. And what they are robbing from you is this capability of learning and moving beyond it, right? So you are not going to do the yoga and skincare and what else you should get you into.
Multi-point list, trust me.
Yeah. You don't have the motivation to get into solving the problem if they convince you that the problem is not big enough. So I think that there is a responsibility of acknowledging that failure as Kate did, that I think was incredibly valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything from you, Ty? And thank you, Florencio.
No, nothing
Okay.
in particular. Yeah.
So all of us are here. We're in this room. We are living and we are breathing. And we have perhaps experienced a few failures. And when I was preparing for this panel, I looked at a statistic that I'm going to share with you and then I'm going to ask each of us to speak to, or each of you to speak to. And that is the latest statistics in Colorado in 2022. There were more than 75 teenage and younger suicides in this state. So more than 75 in 2022. I don't know numbers for 2023. But I'm going to step out on a limb that those young people, 18 years and younger, probably perceive themselves as a failure in some way, shape, or form. Something they did, something they thought, something they heard, something they witnessed. And I'm going to pretend magically that each of the three of you have the ear of those 75, and you get to say something to them about failure. What do you want to say? There's no wrong answer here.
I think one thing that's sometimes helpful, as simple as this might sound, is that there's a distinction between, in your reaction to failure, there's a distinction between guilt and shame. Okay, so they're not synonymous with each other. So guilt is feeling bad about an action or about an event, right? I failed to do well at the shoot, right? That's feeling bad about a thing. Shame, on the other hand, is feeling bad about yourself, right? Kind of globally. And when you look down the road about people who tend to feel guilty about things versus people who tend to feel ashamed about things, the outcomes could not be more wildly divergent. So when you feel guilty about something, your self-esteem is fine, your mental health tends to be pretty good, and importantly, you tend to take action to remediate it, to fix it, to be better going forward. With shame, there's a couple things that happen with that. So because you feel bad about yourself, you kind of go into yourself in such a way that you go way too deep and it's hard to get yourself out, right? And what starts to happen is, and we don't understand why this happens quite so, but we know it happens consistently, is people start to feel very aggressive. And it's aggression, it's a self-hatred directed at the self, but then sometimes it can be externalized to others as well. So, you know, I think anything we can do to support people, right? To say that the failure you've had, let's contextualize that. This was a thing. Even if it was like you got fired from your job, it's your job, and I understand it's a big deal, but that's not you, right? Because I think that's what people can get really tripped up on sometimes.
Your wisdom, I see you shaking your head emphatically. You have the ear of the 75 who didn't make it in 2022. What do you want to say?
You are not defined by your failure. You define it, right? I think about my sister. My sister, she started college. She went to UC Merced maybe 5-6 years back, and she got arrested. And I myself, I'm literally on the phone with her as she's being arrested by a police officer for something that she didn't do. And I'm crying, I'm breaking down, getting on the first flight from DC to San Francisco, driving like a maniac down to Merced to get her out, and talking with her, and her feeling crushed, her feeling so defined by this incident that moving forward, she starts to turn to addiction, and I'm happy to say that she's, 6 months sober now, but part of that process was her taking this incident and making it part of who she was, right? Versus something that she experienced, or how she can use this to redefine who she is moving forward. Something that I've been saying lately is that life is long, right? Oftentimes, we say life is short, you got to do what you want to do. Life is long, and you have multiple opportunities to redefine yourself. And so because you have an incident that makes you feel like a failure, doesn't define your whole entire existence. How do you take that moment, understand it, improve yourself, and use it as a testimony? Every test can be a testimony. Everything can turn your life around and actually make you move to the person that you are becoming. And oftentimes, I think what we see in this world is some of the most successful people have been through some of the most difficult things in our life. And so I think for those young people, it's really understanding that failure does not define you. How do you define it?
Before we move on to you, I just want to draw attention that I have almost 2 feet of blank space over here to my right, and this is where I would love to see your note cards full of questions to tap into the brilliance of these 3 men. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the same vein here, I think that I do think that the first thing to get through is the difference between you and what you failed on as 2 very different things, so that you don't turn it into themselves. And the next thing that I would say, once that is done, I do think that is the first thing. Once that is done, the discussion should be, okay, what can we learn from this so that you can get better? Right? Like, what are you learning from this, and how are you going to change this going forward? And that changes from a extremely negative setup to a more positive looking forward, hopefully less problematic outcome.
Can we back up just a moment? Going back to the people that lift us up. Right? Mm-hmm. The Kates of the world. I'm going to make an assumption, because I worked in suicide prevention for a long time. I'm going to make an assumption that those people who chose to end their life, those young people, that they didn't have somebody in their life who was saying some of the wisdom that we're sharing here today, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't hear that, they didn't know that, they didn't understand it, they didn't have an appreciation for it. Where can we find those people in our lives who support us and love us and say, it'll be okay. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, but it'll be okay. Where do we find them?
Well, and I think that the problem actually gets compounded, because when you start feeling like failure, you turn inside. Mm-hmm. So if you did have somebody, now you don't anymore. So I think that the question is not only where do we find them, but how can we break through that that person that is getting wrapped up inside and is not able to go talk to Kate.
Wisdom.
I also think that sometimes you do need those moments alone, right? I think you need those moments of understanding yourself and understanding what you're going through, right? I think that oftentimes when we experience extreme failure and we want to turn, sometimes we know the steps, right? And even seeing my sister go through AA has been awesome because it is a culture of being honest with yourself and being honest with others and being accountable. My name is such and such and I'm an alcoholic, right? This idea of naming certain things. But I think that there also, what happens sometimes in failure is that everybody has a suggestion or idea of how you need to deal with it and how you become better, right? And sometimes you need to be able to sit in that moment and understand how that failure has impacted you. You can't live in it, right? Once you live in it, that's when the depression starts to sink in. That's when the suicidal ideation starts to sink in. That's when all of these extreme parts of the failure sinks into your psyche. And so I think being able to take a step back and understand how you are adjusting with this and how you can get help and support. Like we said earlier, I love to be outside. For me, when I'm feeling bad, when I'm feeling like a failure, I need to go on a run. I need to go on a hike. I need to be outside. I need to see the beauty of nature to understand that it is not so bad. That it is not just this moment in time, but there is something a lot bigger than what is happening in my life.
Ty.
Yeah, I think one just caveat I want to say, because I do agree with the premise here, but sometimes loved ones are trying to communicate with the person who commits suicide the very messages that they need to hear. But it is just so hard for them to hear it. I just want to point out that can sometimes be the case, right? But I guess one of the things that I learned later in life was just how few people will understand what you're trying to do with any particular thing. And that my reaction to that was to get very frustrated, right? And kind of be like, why don't you understand me, kind of thing. And there was something really liberating to the point about sometimes you just gotta have some alone time too. Is the idea maybe not many people will understand certain parts of you. And that's okay. And it's not malevolent on their part. It's just that people are hard to understand. I've been really blessed, I feel like, that I've had folks, sometimes it just takes one or two. It takes one Kate, right? To get where you're coming from, and believe it or not, that can be enough. It doesn't have to be everybody. So I think there's some liberation in that attitude.
Thank you. We're going to move on to this pile of questions that we now have. The first one is something that I also brought to mind when I was looking at who was making up this panel. And the question is, do you have any thoughts that there are no females on this panel? So I noticed that right away. And the only sensitivity that I brought to it, or the understanding, was that at least we had an Asian, an African American, a Latino, and a queer up here. And then my second thought was, oh, well, maybe it's because women don't really make mistakes. They're just perfect, right? So let's give an applause to the women in the room. Thank you, thank you. Anything you want to say about there are no female panelists here yet?
That's a failure, right?
Yeah, that is a failure.
And I think part of it is something often, when you're in certain spaces like this, conferences, convenings, things of that nature, those are things that always consistently come up, right? I was just in Syracuse, very similar situation. I was a black man on a panel with all white men, and that was a failure on the part of the organizers. But part of what has to be given in terms of feedback, and what we'd like to say, when I was an educator, you got to fail early, and you got to fail often, right? Oftentimes when you are not recognizing or having that experience with failure, you see everything as you do as perfect, right? Like there's a very easy way to say, hey, we left this panel and didn't address that elephant in the room, right? And so I think part of it is like, how do we, as organizers, people who are producing this panel, make sure that, there are guidelines or stipulations about who is on the panel, who's there, and what does it look like moving forward?
Thank you. Ty, anything?
I mean, I guess it is a good point. And there's three seats here, so I guess there's a sometimes that's just going to happen. But to speak to the point directly, maybe, one of the things, of course, is that society reacts differently to failures based on our social identities, right? And one of the things that I'm kind of mansplaining here, I guess, a little bit, but one of the things that happens, of course, is that women's failures are judged more harshly than men's failures, and unfairly and unjustly so. So yes, it would be good, for example, to have that kind of diversity to address those kinds of points.
I agree.
Very much. So what I'm noticing with all of these questions is that none of them say student at the top. So if there are any students and you didn't put that on your paper, forgive me for not noticing it because it's not here. Question for wisdom. How, if you did you repair your relationship with your mother? Going back to your origin story.
That's a really great question. Again, back to this mentality of don't believe me, just watch, right? Like I really had to, that was my mantra for so many years because it didn't feel like I had the support of the community that was behind me. My mother always taught me the value of education. She was the one who pushed me to go to school. She was the one who pushed me to become a doctor. She's the one who pushed me to do all the things that I am even today. But part of it is, some people have to see to believe, right? And so, they talk about, the characteristics of genius and this idea of like delusions of grandeur and being able to do things that people don't believe are able to be done. And so I think for me, the way we repaired it was through time, but she started to see the fruit of my labor, right? The things that I have done have actually produced fruit. But I think part of what we have to change within our dynamics is, being able to believe, particularly for young people, right? Believing in their dreams, believing in the opportunity for them to recreate, right? Again, life is long. There are so many opportunities for you to reinvent, for you to recreate yourself. And so to be fettered or chained to one idea of who you have to become to be successful in this world is a farce, right? People have reinvented themselves over and over again. And so I think, with me and my mom, we're at such a great place today, but she has seen the impact of my work. I took her to the Image Awards and she had a phenomenal time. She met all the celebrities from Black Panther and, she's saying like, oh, like this is, she saw me on CNN and MSNBC and she's like, oh, this is actually working. So.
Question for any of our panelists. Please, can you all elaborate on both of these expressions? Fear of success, fear of failure as obstacles towards your success. Fear of success and fear of failure. Can you elaborate on that?
I can go with fear of failure. I think easier one. In general, we all have fear, and just being in this panel, right? Like, am I gonna say the stupid thing here between us, or what's gonna happen? But and being able to contextualize the potential failure and the impact of that failure would have on my life is what I think about when I'm in that state. Okay, it wouldn't be that bad if I say a totally stupid thing here. Okay, it wouldn't completely change my life. So that's how I psych me up to go through that fear of failure and do things, because otherwise I think you get paralyzed.
I say, so for the longest time, my biggest fear was not living up to my potential, right? I think in my life experience, I've oftentimes been a token Black person in many spaces. And so a lot of times from, K through 12 through college, and even in my current career, outside of the organization, I will oftentimes be looked at as a speaker for the Black community, a person who speaks on behalf of others, a person who represents other people who are not in the room. And some of the things that I've learned, in my time is that oftentimes you don't have to be the voice for the community. You can just pass the mic. How are you also bringing other people into that space? But also that your potential is limitless, right? And so this idea of a fear of not living up to your potential or a fear of success, starts to breed insecurity. But again, I think you have to kind of redefine what that means for you, right? Like, you know, the fact that you woke up today, that you're here, that you're present, that you're engaging. You know, I tell my team all the time, you have to do the work to be inspired. You know, part of the reason I'm at CWA is to be inspired by other people. And so to be in this moment in time, I am living up to my potential. I am walking in my purpose. I am living the life that I didn't know was going to happen for me, but I am executing it to the best of my ability, and that is okay, and I am enough. And I have been going to therapy to help me get to this place.
I love this question because of the fear of success part of it, which I feel like sometimes we don't talk about, but it's huge, right? Because if you're successful, things are going to change, and it's about half good and about half bad, right? And I think sometimes, well, for me, the indicator is if my house is really, really clean, and I am, the other day, this just happened a couple of weeks ago, I was organizing my safety pins by size.
You had no idea what you were walking into today, did you, ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah, this is not a trait like compulsion, so I kind of caught myself. I'm like, so what's going on, man? You know, what's going on here? I had a story coming up due. I was 95% done with it. This kind of safety pin organizing activity always happens when I'm 95% there, you know. And when I think this could be really good, you know, what happens if this actually gets traction and takes off? And you know, there's all kinds of bad things that happen. You get attention, but you know, some of that attention's not good. Some people are just going to hate, and you know, that's just part of the thing. You know, sometimes it puts you now into a new level of challenge that you're not prepared for yet. And you end up with a bunch of craft food services trucks and making an ass of yourself on camera, you know? So yeah, I think it's really rational, especially for the students here, you know, I'll say, because I think it's so front and center at that point in your life that there's these ways we self-sabotage. And it's especially in the ways that we could be really powerful, I think, in the ways we could really transform and affect change.
Thank you. The next two questions are from students. One is, how do you learn to step past failures? What are the things or people who allow you to thrive? How do you step past failures? It's for anyone.
Well, I was talking with Joseph about this earlier. The founder and CEO of Essence, she talks about how she allows herself to have 5 failures a day, right? Something goes wrong, she moves past it. Something goes wrong, she moves past it. She gives herself 5 times before she personalizes it, right? Because she has claimed that she has the strongest bounce back than any person in the world, right? Because when you allow yourself to fail, it's not about the failure, it's about how are you bouncing back from it, right? You know, oftentimes it is the negative thoughts in our brain. You know, we can talk about brain chemistry and, you know, how that works, but, you know, how are you not making that failure a part of who you are so that you can get back to walking in your purpose, right? Because the failure is for the moment, but you have an entire lifetime to continue to fail and to continue to succeed. And, you know, oftentimes what I do in my brain is, you know, we ask this question, like, what if it doesn't work? What if it fails? Well, what if it does? What if we succeed? What if we thrive? What if we are actually able to get to where we want to go? And so it's really about building, and particularly for students here and for everybody, is building that tenacity to be able to bounce back from your failures, right? To get back on track, because it's only a moment.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I have a little mantra that's stuck in my head from when I was 12 years old. So I was a really mediocre football player, and we had this old school coach, and he'd say, "Look, if you idiots get to the line of scrimmage, and you somehow forgot the play that was called in the huddle, just hit somebody." And it was like this existential moment for me. I'm like, what great wisdom, right? That is. And to this day, you know, I'll be in a situation where I'm like, this isn't going as well as it could. I think I'm messing this up. And coach's voice, just hit somebody. you know? And I think that's good. Sometimes we can get too meta about things, right? And work ourselves into such complexity. Now we're tied up in knots. You know, there's that, you can take that too far, but I think, yeah, just hit somebody.
And I don't think this is condoning violence. I think this is more like taking action.
It's metaphorical.
Right? Yeah, it's
Do
metaphorical.
something.
So if it's okay.
Can I say
yes,
one
of
more
course.
comment on these two? There are ways that we're becoming smart and actually creating processes to make this happen. So in software development, there is these like big like current process that you normally use called agile development. And in agile development, you do retrospectives. And basically every 2 weeks, you sit down with the team and you ask, what did we fail in these last 2 weeks? So what it's trying to do is trying to normalize failures and turn them into learning and progress events, right? And you do it every 2 weeks. So now it basically becomes very obvious, since you're doing it every 2 weeks, that the team is not a failure as a team. It's we can get better as a team working together if we recognize the failure events that happen through the 2 weeks. So it's kind of like a way to create a process around what you guys were talking about.
That's great.
Thank you. This next question is for all three, but I'm wondering if it's okay if I actually give a part answer to it as well. As a young person starting college, how do you deal with the feeling of pressure and anxiety to be successful, to define yourself and your goals? So that's a lot, right? I don't know if all of us here remember what it's like to be 18, 19, and 20 years old, all of that pressure. But how I want to answer this, I just lost power. Are we done? Is it lunchtime? How I want to answer this, I guess I'm not allowed to talk, that's why they turned my microphone off, is this: success leaves clues. So people who have been through very similar things to what you have been through have left clues. They have written books, they have developed programs, they have recorded podcasts, they have written blogs, they have email lists, they have all of this information, and so much of it is free and available 24/7. So find people who have been through what you're going through and allow them and their knowledge to support you. Thanks, Rita. Anyone else? And let me know if you want me to repeat the question and know that still doesn't.
Well, one thing I might say is that my opinion, just anecdotally, would be that there's way too much pressure that society puts on you as a young person these days, in the sense that there's such this pressure to be like a brand almost, right? Even when you apply for college, like you almost have to sell yourself as like this package, this brand. I've done all these things. I've started all these organizations, and you know, of course, you get into it a little bit, and you find out what people really did, and you're like, it really wasn't that real. But we have this perception, right? And then with social media, that makes it worse, amplifies it a bit. You know, one of the things I would say is nobody's as fancy as they're making themselves out to be. You know, and I know this is not going to sound helpful, but I'm going to say it anyways. There's actually no rush. You don't have to be killing it today. You know, if you're a freshman, you're a sophomore, I could care less, you know. One of the most helpful things to me, when I was 24 years old, I was having my quarter-life crisis, I call it. And there was this magazine that only had like 5 issues before they failed and went under, but their first issue was amazing. And they had interviewed all these really famous people who are now very successful, and they said, what were you doing when you were 25? I guess it was a humbler time, but all of them said, I was not doing anything really that was notable. Dan Brokaw, I think he was selling hot dogs at the ice skating rink in New York City, you know, and but all of them said that it was the times when they were least defined by extrinsic reward, by, you know, getting notoriety, that they reached the most important insights and developed the most important skills of their life. So I know this is hard to hear, but for whoever asked this question, I'd say just take your time and listen You're here to learn and listen and get a bigger sense of the world. And if you do that, you're going to actually leapfrog everybody else down the road.
That makes me think about this this quote. I think I got it from a movie where it says the true test of man is not how they're better than somebody else, but how they're better than their former self, right? Where you are in a race with just you and you alone, and it's up to you to define what that looks like, right? Oftentimes, and it's wild because college creates a culture of competitiveness. You have to get into the school. You have to be better than others to be here. You have to get into the position. We have a competitive culture that is inbred into society. But I think that Gen Z has actually been doing a lot better job than older generations, right? You know, this idea of YOLO, this idea of I don't dream of labor, this idea of there are other ways for us to exist than the current culture that we've presented for ourselves today. And I'm really interested in consistently exploring that and giving opportunities for young people to explore what that looks like. Because, so I went to UC Santa Cruz, and before, the last 20 years, UC Santa Cruz had a pass-fail system, right? It was not a grade. It was not, if you wanted a grade, you could ask for a grade, but it was a pass-fail system. And the teacher would actually write you a paragraph or two about your performance in class, right? And that did so much more for students than a letter grade, right? This idea of how are you growing as a person, not how am I comparing to other people on this panel or other people in this room, but how am I developing as an individual person? And I think that we have to explore more systems that allow us to think in that way.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left. This is specific to the females in the room, but I'm going to ask you to address it. Emotional women who experience failure often have nowhere that is safe to share. Nothing worse than breaking down in tears over the shame of failure, especially for perfectionists. What do you recommend? It is tough for women. Any of us?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to my original answer about success leaves clues. So there are the Michelle Obamas out there. There are the Brene Browns out there. There are the Mel Robbins out there. They have been through some stuff in their lives, and they have gotten through to the other side, or they are getting through to the other side. And they are writing, and they are speaking, and they are on panels, and they are on podcasts. So find that as your safe space. Anything else?
I would say, because this also kind of starts to bridge into the gap of like mental health. Oftentimes in the mental health spaces, we talk about your starting five. Who are your people that you can turn to, that you can rely on, that you can cry with, that you can be vulnerable with? Even in politics, we talk about a kitchen cabinet, and it's a different form there, but who are the people who are in your inner circle that you can turn to? And we've talked about this even with the young people who have committed suicide, right? Like, oftentimes, we need to be able to have people that we can turn to be absolutely vulnerable with, right? I have my older cousin that I know I can call him and I can cry on the phone. I can be vulnerable with him completely, right? Utterly and openly. And so to be able to have that, because we don't have a culture that allows you to be vulnerable. We don't have a culture that allows you to feel those feelings when you're in that moment. And so who are the people that you're turning to? And so I advise you to have a starting five.
I just, that's great. That's a great point. And I was thinking about who is in my starting five and the characteristics they have. One of the things, I'll speak for myself, but I guess a male-centric way that I've approached some of this is thinking about instrumental support. So what are you going to do? How are we going to fix this, right? I've said that a couple of times today. And that's fine, and sometimes that's what people need. Sometimes people just need you to be quiet and listen and actually just empathize with what's going on. Right, they need that emotional support. There is a tendency, there's a lot of diversity, but there is a tendency for women to value that emotional support more than men do in research studies. And I think, men can get in that fix-it mode sometimes, which is so unhelpful if that's not what you're looking for, right?
Yes.
So part of your starting five, have some non-fixers in it, I might say. And for us as men, just being open to the idea that there's a broader way that we can support others besides the ways we've typically been trained to do it.
Thank you. Somehow in my moderator mind, I think this question is related, and it is, what are your thoughts on failures of health, where your own body betrays you? So first, what I would like to do as you're considering that question is, we have this practice and it's called a whoosh. So you put your hands near your heart chakra, and on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, first I'm going to show you what it is, and then we'll do it. 1, 2, 3. You just go whoosh, and you're just sending healing light, love to that person whose body is currently failing, in their words. So 1, 2, 3. Whoosh. And the person who asks the question just receives. What do you got, gentlemen?
So my grandma lived to be 102 years old, which is incredible. Her mom lived to be 103 years old, so I'm pretty good on mom's side of the family. It is interesting, though. You get to be 102 and certain things fail, right? It's just going to be the way it goes. And one of the things that during the pandemic, a quarantine and everything, I was going to give Grandma COVID, but one of the things that was such a blessing was be able to spend a lot of time with my grandma. We had lunch every day, and she had various ailments and so forth. And one of the things I just thought to myself every day was, how can I age in a way that I'm like that, because she couldn't walk at that point. She's in a wheelchair and everything else, and she had somehow transcended her body, which I just used to think was kind of woo-woo and out there, but she had actually done it and made me a believer. I don't know how you do that, but obviously when our health fails, it's front and center. But I don't have a good answer for this, but that's my aspiration.
So are you saying you need to be able to separate your body from your person?
Yeah.
Is that the,
yeah.
is that the basic idea?
Yeah, no, that's exactly, thank you. That's exactly it. And even when her vision, because her vision would go in and out a little bit, and she was this beautiful painter and painted birds and everything. So on days her vision wasn't good, we'd sit outside in the patio and she'd just close her eyes. And now it's just the auditory. And she would start to do improv. And she'd be like, that bird sounds weird. What do you think he's saying? And we start making up stuff. And we'd be like, oh, what do you think his buddies think about that? And we kind of go back and forth. So there's just this ability to be like grateful for what you had, which is so hard to do, obviously, in the face of other things failing on you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left.
Sorry. Kind of like treating the body like the tasks
Yes.
that we were talking about
Yes.
before, right?
Yeah.
Like it's it doesn't need to define you.
This question is, how do I help children in my family learn to rebound from adversity? They are dealing with bullying and divorce. How do I help the children in my family deal with adversity?
Well, one thing I might say is it's not their job to fix those things. I think kids sometimes, one of the things I would think as a hypothesis going into that room is I think the kid thinks it's one, they might think it's their fault, which kids can do, and two, they might think it's their job to fix it, even if they don't think it's their fault. And so I think to relieve them of that, this is not your failure. This is something that's going on that's hard to deal with, but it's not yours, would be, one place to start. I think the second thing would be that they're going to cope with it in ways sometimes that aren't great. And that's part of being a kid too, And one of the most, I guess, concrete examples of this is developmental psychologists do these studies where they look at kids in the kitchen. And kids, if you look at young kids, kids want to help. They want to do things, and they make a complete disaster out of the process, And parents will be like, oh, why don't you just go watch TV, or why don't you just, because it's more trouble than it's worth. But I think that generalizes to other things as well. And something even like a divorce or bullying or something else, they might be rageful. They might want revenge, right? They might have these fantasies that kind of scare you and aren't great. But that's part of the thing. And I think just giving them the space to explore that, right, and talk about it, as uncomfortable as that is as an adult, is a really important thing.
Thank you. To wrap up, there's two things I want to share with you. And one is for those who are right-handed, to take your right hand and put it over your left shoulder. And those who are left-handed, Katie, put it over your right shoulder. And close your eyes. And breathe. And just pat yourself on the back. Keep your hand there, keep your eyes closed, breathe again. And pat yourself on the back like you really mean it. Like all of those failures, all those attempts to thrive brought you to this moment, and you are giving yourself an atta-girl or atta-boy. And the last thing, I do not get paid any more for this announcement. Actually, Bob, do I get paid at all for this? Yeah, okay. It's something that Ty's grandmother mentioned, taking improv. So if you ever want to experience just showing up and looking silly and having your failures or mistakes celebrated, go take an improv class. There's some great classes here in Boulder, in Denver, and in other parts of the world. And it is such an gorgeous, freeing experience for us to fail, for us to thrive, and for us to get messy with this thing called the human condition. So that is my out. What do you guys got? Last thoughts?
Go out there and fail.
Fail early, fail often, and failure isn't final.
Yeah, keep going. You'll be all right.
There's no rush. Thank you for being here.